Fleet Admiral Crixthal of the Dominari Hegemony stood upon the command bridge of the Eternal Subjugation, the largest warship the Galactic Coalition had ever assembled. His 4 arms were clasped behind his back, his crimson scales catching the dim amber light of the tactical displays. Around him, the bridge crew worked in practiced silence, each member of the multi-species coalition performing their duties with the precision expected of those who served aboard the flagship. Through the massive viewing port that dominated the forward section of the bridge, Crixthal could see them all. 473 warships from 12 different species, arranged in the traditional Dominion formation that had brought 64 civilizations to their knees over the past 8,000 years. Today, it would be 65. Admiral, his second-in-command, a pale-skinned Velthrani named Sothis, approached with the measured grace of her species. Her translucent wings folded tight against her back, and her compound eyes reflected the tactical hologram like fractured gemstones. The final fleet elements have achieved formation coherence. We are ready to proceed to the target system. Crixthal allowed himself a small gesture of satisfaction, a flick of his secondary arms. And the intelligence briefings? What do we know of these, humans? Sothis manipulated a control pad, and a holographic display materialized between them. A blue-green world rotated slowly, surrounded by orbital structures that seemed almost quaint compared to the massive construction platforms of established galactic powers. "Earth," she said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones of her species. "Third planet in their system. They have been spacefaring for approximately 200 of their years, though their capability for interstellar travel has only existed for the past 43. Their military presence is—" she paused, and something that might have been amusement crossed her features. "Modest." Define modest. Their combined space-based military consists of approximately 200 vessels, the largest of which barely qualify as cruiser class by coalition standards. Their weapons technology relies on primitive kinetic accelerators and guided fusion warheads. Their defensive screens are— She checked her data again, as if unable to believe what she was reading. They use layered ablative armor, Admiral, physical armor, like the primitives of the pre-Unity era. A sound rippled through the nearby bridge crew, the Dominari equivalent of laughter. Crixthal silenced them with a look, but even he could not suppress the satisfaction that coiled through his chest. "And they refused the coalition's generous terms?" Emphatically, Sothis confirmed. Their representative, a female called Secretary General Chen, stated that Earth would, and I quote, "rather burn than bend." She terminated the communication link before our diplomats could explain the consequences of such defiance. Crixthal turned back to the viewing port. In the distance, barely visible against the star-scattered void, he could see the glowing drives of the Threlkai dreadnoughts. Living ships grown from the harvested nervous systems of conquered worlds. Behind them, the geometric precision of Velthrani crystal carriers. To the port side, the brutalist efficiency of Krogan devastators, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. 473 ships. The combined might of the Galactic Coalition assembled for the singular purpose of teaching one small species the price of pride. "They have never faced a true galactic power," Crixthal said, more to himself than to Sothis. "They have no conception of what we represent. That will change today." He moved to his command throne, settling into the specially designed seat that accommodated his species' physiology. The throne interfaced with his neural implants, feeding him a constant stream of tactical data from across the fleet. "Signal all vessels," he commanded. "We translate to the human system in 3 standard time units. Formation discipline will be maintained throughout the operation. This is a demonstration, not a battle. I want these humans to see exactly what stands against them before they make their final choice." "And if they choose resistance?" Krixthal's inner eyelids nictated slowly, the Dominari expression of patient certainty. "Then we will remove them from the galactic equation. Their world will serve as a mining colony, and their population will be distributed among the member species as labor stock." He paused, considering. "Though I suspect they will surrender the moment they see our formation. Every species does, in the end." Sothis inclined her head in acknowledgement and moved to relay his orders. As she departed, Krixthal allowed his thoughts to drift to the coming confrontation. He had overseen dozens of such operations during his career. The methodology was always the same: arrive in overwhelming force, demonstrate the futility of resistance, accept surrender, and integrate the conquered species into the coalition's economic framework. The Dominari had perfected this process over millennia, and it had never failed. Not once. Humanity would be no different. A young species, barely out of their gravity well, with no comprehension of the vast and ancient powers that moved through the galaxy. They would bluster, as all young species did. They would threaten, as all young species did. And then, faced with the undeniable reality of their situation, they would submit. As all species did. The countdown timer appeared in Krixthal's neural interface. 3 time units. Then the jump. Then the lesson. Part 2. Arrival. The Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a cascade of dimensional rifts tearing open the fabric of space-time in a display that had been calculated to maximize psychological impact. Ships materialized in a precisely choreographed sequence, each arrival adding to the growing constellation of warships that now dominated the outer reaches of the Sol system. Krixthal felt a surge of pride as the eternal subjugation completed its translation. Through the viewing port, he could see the distant light of the human sun, a modest yellow star, unremarkable by galactic standards. Somewhere ahead, orbiting an insignificant world around that insignificant star, an insignificant species was about to learn its place in the cosmic order. Fleet translation complete, Sothis reported from her station. All 473 vessels have achieved stable position. No anomalies detected. Human response? Scanning. She consulted her displays. Multiple communication attempts on primitive electromagnetic frequencies. They appear to be attempting to establish contact. Let them wait. Krixthal gestured dismissively. Begin the approach. Standard intimidation protocol. I want our formation visible to every sensor they possess. The fleet began to move, engines igniting in synchronized bursts that pushed the massive armada toward the inner system. At their current velocity, they would reach Earth orbit in approximately 6 standard time units, long enough for the humans to fully appreciate what was coming for them. Krixthal watched the tactical display as his fleet advanced. The human vessels, what few there were, had begun to move, forming up in a defensive perimeter around their homeworld. He counted them with something approaching pity. 217 ships, the largest barely a third the size of his flagship. They're deploying, one of the sensor operators reported, a Krogan male whose scarred hide spoke to decades of combat experience. Defensive formation around the third planet. They're also evacuating their orbital habitats, civilian vessels moving toward their moon. Prudent, Krixthal acknowledged. They know they cannot win, but they seek to protect their non-combatants. There is some wisdom in them, at least. Admiral. Sothis' voice carried an unusual note, not quite concern, but something close to it. I'm detecting an anomaly at the edge of the system, near the heliopause. Clarify. I'm uncertain. Her wings twitched, a sign of agitation in her species. There's a gravitational disturbance. Something is affecting local spacetime, but our sensors cannot determine the source. Krixthal waved a dismissive hand. Likely a natural phenomenon. This system is young, unstable. Continue the approach. But even as he spoke, a cold thread of uncertainty wound through his thoughts. The Velthrani were rarely uncertain about anything. Their crystalline sensor arrays were among the most sophisticated in the galaxy. If Sothis couldn't identify something... Admiral, the Krogan sensor operator's voice cracked with sudden alarm. The disturbance is intensifying. Mass readings are... Admiral, I'm reading a mass equivalent to a small moon, but it's concentrated in a space barely larger than our flagship. Before Krixthal could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. The dimensional rift that materialized near the edge of the Sol system was unlike anything the Coalition had ever witnessed. It wasn't the controlled, precise aperture of a hyperspace translation. It was a wound in reality, a savage tear that bled light in colors that shouldn't exist. The rift expanded, stabilized, and from within its depths, something emerged. For a long moment, the bridge of the eternal subjugation fell absolutely silent. The vessel that came through the rift defied comprehension. It was massive. That was the first thing that registered in Krixthal's mind. Not massive in the way that the Coalition's dreadnoughts were massive, but massive in a way that seemed to violate the understood principles of spacecraft construction. The ship stretched for kilometers upon kilometers, its dimensions so vast that the sensors initially registered it as a spatial anomaly rather than a vessel. That's... Sothis' voice had lost all its musical quality. That's not possible. The ship's design was brutal, utilitarian, and profoundly alien despite its human origin. Angular lines and aggressive geometries combined with sweeping curves that somehow managed to be both graceful and threatening. The hull was a deep, light-absorbing black, broken only by running lights that pulsed with a slow, patient rhythm, like the heartbeat of some vast predator. And then there were the weapons. Krixthal had spent his entire career studying armament configurations. He knew every weapon system employed by every species in the Coalition and beyond. He could identify a ship's capability at a glance, assess its threat potential in microseconds. Looking at this human vessel, he understood nothing. The ship bristled with projections, emitters, and arrays that his experience couldn't categorize. Massive spinal mounts ran the length of the vessel, their purpose unknown but their scale terrifying. Smaller, though still enormous by any conventional standard, weapon batteries dotted the hull in configurations that suggested overlapping fields of fire with no blind spots. The entire surface of the ship seemed designed to kill. "Get me dimensions," Krixthal ordered, his voice steady despite the cold dread spreading through his hearts. "Mass readings, anything." I'm trying, Admiral." The Krogan operator's hands trembled as he worked his console. Length is approximately 12.7 kilometers. Width varies, but maximum is 4.1 kilometers. Mass readings are still inconsistent, but initial estimates suggest approximately 8 billion metric tons. He looked up, his face pale. "Admiral, that's more than twice the mass of our entire fleet, combined." The bridge crew began to murmur, voices rising in a dozen different languages. Kriksthal silenced them with a sharp gesture, but he could feel the fear spreading through his officers like a contagion. "Impossible," he declared, injecting his voice with a confidence he no longer felt. "No species can construct a vessel of that size. It would require—" "Admiral, they're hailing us." "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," she continued. "Audio and visual. Coalition standard protocols." Kriksthal exchanged a glance with Sothis. The implications were clear. Somehow, the humans had acquired detailed knowledge of Coalition communication systems. That shouldn't have been possible. Such information was classified at the highest levels.
"Put it through," he ordered.
The main viewing screen flickered, and a human face appeared. It was a male, late middle-aged by human standards, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that looked as though it had been carved from granite. He wore a uniform of deep navy blue, decorated with insignia and honors that Kriksthal didn't recognize. But it was the human's eyes that held the Admiral's attention. Pale gray, cold as vacuum, and utterly without fear. "Coalition fleet," the human said, his voice carrying an authority that transcended species. "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Earth Dreadnought Prometheus. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You have ignored all attempts at diplomatic communication. You have deployed in an attack formation oriented toward our homeworld." He paused, and something that might have been a smile, though entirely without warmth, crossed his features. "You have made several critical errors in judgment today. Allow me to correct them." Part 3. The Message. Fleet Admiral Kriksthal found his voice, drawing on 2 centuries of experience to project a calm he didn't feel. "Human vessel, you are in violation of Coalition transit protocols. You will stand down immediately or face the consequences." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "I don't recall Earth signing any agreements regarding Coalition transit protocols, which means your protocols are exactly as relevant to us as our breakfast choices are to you." He leaned forward slightly. "That is to say, not at all." "You appear to misunderstand the situation." Kriksthal gestured at the tactical display visible behind him. "We represent the combined military might of 12 galactic civilizations. 473 warships. You are one vessel, regardless of its size." 473, Chen repeated, nodding slowly. "We counted. We've also completed a full tactical analysis of every vessel in your formation. Weapon systems, defensive capabilities, crew complements, power generation, propulsion technology." He tilted his head slightly. "Would you like to know what we found?" Kriksthal felt a chill run through him. "You're bluffing." "The Dominari flagship, Eternal Subjugation," Chen continued as if Kriksthal hadn't spoken. "Crew of 4,700, including the Admiral's personal guard of 200 augmented soldiers. Primary armament consists of 12 plasma lance batteries, 36 mass accelerator turrets, and a spinal-mounted siege laser with an effective range of 50,000 kilometers. Defensive screens are Threlkai-derived energy barriers, 3rd generation, capable of absorbing approximately 40 terajoules before failure. The vessel's reactor core is a Krogan-designed fusion plant operating at 78% efficiency, located in Section 47C of the engineering deck." The bridge of the Eternal Subjugation had gone utterly silent. "Shall I continue?" Chen asked. "I have similar data for every ship in your formation. We've been watching you for quite some time, Admiral. Did you really think we wouldn't notice 400 warships massing at the edge of our sensor range?" "How?" Sotis breathed, her voice barely audible. "The more important question," Chen said, "is what you intend to do now that you're here. So let me make our position absolutely clear." The view behind the human admiral shifted, and suddenly the coalition officers could see the interior of the Prometheus's bridge. It was vast, far larger than any command center they had ever seen, and filled with humans working at stations that stretched into the distance. The technology visible in the background was unlike anything in the coalition database. Interfaces and displays that seemed to respond to thought and gesture rather than physical input. "Earth is not a conquest waiting to happen," Chen said. "Earth is not a modest spacefaring civilization that will surrender at the sight of your formation. Earth has been aware of the Coalition's existence for over 70 years. We have spent those 7 decades preparing for exactly this moment." 70 years? Crixthal found himself speaking despite his shock. "That's impossible. Your species only achieved interstellar capability." "When you observed us achieving interstellar capability," Chen corrected, "there's a difference. Your scouts found what we wanted them to find. Your intelligence gathered what we allowed them to gather. You came here today expecting to intimidate a primitive species with a few hundred obsolete ships." For the first time, genuine amusement entered Chen's expression. "You found something else entirely." As if on cue, the tactical displays across the Coalition fleet updated simultaneously. The sensor data from the human dreadnought had resolved, finally producing usable numbers, and what those numbers showed sent a wave of panic through 473 bridge crews. The Prometheus wasn't just large, it was a fortress given mobility. The power readings emanating from its core exceeded the combined output of the entire Coalition fleet by a factor of 7. Its defensive screens, whatever technology powered them, registered as effectively impenetrable to Coalition sensor systems, and its weapons. "Those aren't weapons," the Krogan sensor operator whispered, staring at his display. "Those are extinction-level devices." "Admiral Chen," Crixthal said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "let us be reasonable. There is no need for conflict between our peoples. The Coalition is prepared to negotiate." "You came here to enslave us," Chen interrupted, his voice flat. "You came here with a fleet designed to shock and awe. You came here expecting us to kneel." He shook his head slowly. "We don't kneel." "Then what do you want?" "What I want," Chen said, "is for you to understand something. So I'm going to give you a demonstration. A message, if you will. Something for you to take back to your Coalition and share with every species that thinks they might want to try what you've tried today." Before Crixthal could respond, the Prometheus began to move. The dreadnought's engines flared with a light so intense that the optical filters on a dozen Coalition ships activated automatically. The massive vessel accelerated, and it accelerated impossibly, moving like a fighter craft despite its moon-scale mass. In seconds, it had closed half the distance to the Coalition fleet. "All ships, defensive formation," Crixthal commanded. But even as the orders left his mouth, he knew it was futile. The human ship was moving faster than anything that size had any right to move, covering distances that should have taken minutes in mere moments. The Prometheus came to a halt in the center of the Coalition formation. For a moment, nothing happened. The massive dreadnought simply hung there, surrounded by 473 Coalition warships, their weapons trained on its hull. The relative sizes were absurd. The human vessel dwarfed even the largest of the Coalition's capital ships, the way a whale might dwarf a school of fish.
"Target the human vessel," Crixthal ordered. "All ships, prepare to—"
"I wouldn't." Chen's voice cut through the command channel. "Here's your demonstration." A section of the Prometheus's hull opened. From within the dreadnought's bowels, a single object emerged. A missile, perhaps, or a probe. It was small relative to the ships around it, barely visible on the tactical displays. The object accelerated away from the fleet, heading toward the outer system. "Watch," Chen said. On the long-range sensors, the Coalition fleet tracked the object as it sped toward the system's edge. There, beyond the orbits of the outer planets, drifted a massive asteroid. A rocky body several hundred kilometers in diameter, one of thousands that inhabited the system's equivalent of a Kuiper belt. The object reached the asteroid, and the asteroid ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no gradual dissolution. One moment, the asteroid was there, hundreds of kilometers of rock and ice that had drifted through the void since the system's formation. The next moment, it simply wasn't. The object had touched it, and the asteroid had vanished, converted into energy or compressed into something so small that sensors couldn't detect it. That, Chen said into the stunned silence, was a demonstration at less than 1% of the Prometheus's offensive capacity. The weapon we used is called a graviton cascade projector. It creates a localized singularity that consumes matter at the atomic level. The asteroid you just watched disappear had approximately the same mass as your entire fleet. Crixthal couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what he had just witnessed. "One shot," Chen continued, 1% power, and your entire fleet would be gone, along with everything else within a 10,000-kilometer radius. That's what you brought to our doorstep, Admiral. That's what you threatened our homeworld with. 473 ships that I could destroy with a single command." The communications channel fell silent for a long moment. "But I'm not going to destroy you," Chen finally said. "Not today. Because unlike the Coalition, humanity doesn't believe in conquest. We don't subjugate. We don't enslave. We build, we create, and we defend what's ours. Your fleet came here to take something that wasn't yours to take. I'm going to let you leave, Admiral, so that you can deliver a message to your Coalition." "What? What message?" Chen leaned forward, and for the first time, there was something almost gentle in his expression. The gentleness of a parent explaining something important to a child. "Earth is not alone. Earth has allies you've never met, technologies you've never imagined, and a capacity for warfare that would give your nightmares nightmares. For 70 years, we watched your Coalition move through the galaxy. We saw what you did to the Threlkai when they resisted. We saw the mining colonies you created from conquered worlds. We saw the labor camps, the forced breeding programs, the systematic destruction of cultures and identities." His expression hardened. "And we prepared." Part 4. The Truth. Fleet Admiral Crixthal sat in his command throne, surrounded by officers who no longer looked at him with respect, but with fear and confusion. The Prometheus hung in the center of their formation like a knife pressed against a throat, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing they could do about it. "You prepared," Crixthal repeated, his voice hollow. "For 70 years. "Longer, actually," Chen replied. "But 70 years in earnest, since we first detected Coalition scouts in our outer system. You should know, Admiral, those scouts never left. We captured them, studied their technology, interviewed their crews." "Interviewed?" "We didn't torture them, if that's what you're thinking. We didn't have to.
Most of them were remarkably willing to share information once they understood they weren't going to be executed or enslaved. Apparently, that's what the Coalition does to captured personnel.
Crixthal had no response to that. It was true. From those scouts, we learned about the Coalition's structure, its member species, its military capabilities, its history of conquest. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact, but something dark lurked beneath the surface. We learned about the 64 civilizations you've absorbed over the past 8,000 years, some through negotiation, most through force. We learned what happens to species that resist, how their populations are dispersed, their cultures erased, their identities dissolved into the Coalition's machinery. "It is the way of things," Crixthal said, though the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "The strong prevail, the weak serve. This is the natural order."
Is it? Chen leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you about humanity's history, Admiral. We're a young species by galactic standards, only a few 100,000 years since we achieved sapience. In that time, we've done terrible things to each other. Wars, genocides, atrocities that make your Coalition's methods look almost civilized. We know what we're capable of. We've looked into that abyss, and we've seen ourselves reflected in it."
He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter.
"But we also learned something. We learned that the strong don't have to dominate, that power doesn't have to mean conquest, that there are other ways, better ways, to exist with those who are different from us. We haven't perfected those ways. We may never perfect them, but we've committed to trying."
"A pleasant philosophy," Crixthal said. "But philosophy doesn't build warships. Philosophy doesn't create weapons that can destroy asteroids with a touch."
"No," Chen agreed. "Fear builds those. Necessity builds those. The knowledge that somewhere out there, someone like you was coming. Someone who would look at our world and see nothing but resources to be extracted and people to be enslaved. We built the Prometheus because we had no choice. We developed weapons that can break planets because we understood that anything less wouldn't be enough." He gestured, and new images appeared on the Coalition's view screens, images of Earth. Its cities glittering at night, its oceans gleaming blue, its people going about their lives.
8 billion humans live on that world, Chen said. Another 2 billion in orbital habitats and colonies throughout this system. They have families, dreams, hopes. They create art and music and literature. They love and grieve and struggle and strive. They are not resources to be harvested. They are not labor stock to be distributed.
His voice hardened.
They are people, and we will protect them. Against you. Against your Coalition. Against anyone who threatens them. Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. Crixthal stared at the images of Earth, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something that might have been doubt. The Coalition's philosophy had always been simple. The strong prevailed. It was the natural order, the way things had always been. The Dominari had risen to power through strength, and they maintained that power through strength. But looking at the human dreadnought, at the casual, almost contemptuous ease with which it had demonstrated its ability to destroy everything he had brought to this system, he found himself questioning certainties he had held for 200 years. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. "3 things," Chen said. "First, you will leave this system immediately. You will not return. Any Coalition vessel that enters human space without explicit invitation will be destroyed. This is not a threat. This is a statement of policy." "And the second?" "You will carry a message back to your Coalition. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them about the Prometheus and the weapon that destroyed that asteroid. Tell them that Earth is not alone, that we have allies, resources, and capabilities that we have not revealed. Tell them that the age of coalition expansion is over. Any species that wishes to remain independent will find Earth a willing partner in that independence. Crixthal felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The implications of that statement were staggering. The coalition's power was built on fear, on the certainty that resistance was futile. If word spread that a species had successfully defied them, that one ship had faced down an entire armada—
"You're trying to start a rebellion," he breathed.
"I'm offering an alternative," Chen corrected. "The species of this galaxy have lived under the Coalition's shadow for 8 millennia. They've accepted subjugation because they believed they had no choice. I'm showing them that choice exists."
And the third thing? Chen's expression shifted, becoming something that Crixthal couldn't quite read, something that might have been sorrow, or perhaps regret.
"The third thing is more of a warning than a demand. The Prometheus is not alone. It is the first of its class, but not the last. Even now, in shipyards that your intelligence has never detected, more vessels like this one are under construction. In 10 of your years, we will have a fleet capable of challenging the Coalition itself. In 20, we will be able to end it."
He let that sink in. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. We don't want war. We don't want conquest. We want to be left alone, and we want others to have that same choice. But if the Coalition forces our hand, if you come for us again, or if you move against the species that choose to align with us, we will respond. And when we do, it won't be with demonstrations. It will be with the full, unrestrained power of everything we've built."
Chen's eyes met Crixthal's through the viewscreen. "You came here expecting to intimidate a primitive species into submission. Instead, you've discovered that the primitives have been watching you, learning from you, preparing for you. And now, Admiral, you face a choice. You can return to your coalition and tell them the truth, and perhaps avoid the war that's coming. Or you can lie, downplay what you've seen, and ensure that when we finally do meet in battle, the destruction will be total. You're asking me to undermine 8,000 years of coalition authority. I'm asking you to save your civilization from extinction." Chen's voice was flat, without emotion. "That's what's at stake here, Admiral. Not pride, not honor, not tradition, survival. If the Coalition continues on its current path, it will eventually encounter humanity on the battlefield. And when that happens, there will be no demonstrations, no warnings, no second chances." He rose from his chair. "You have 1 hour to begin your withdrawal. After that, my patience ends." Part 5. Withdrawal. The Coalition fleet began its retreat 47 minutes later. Crixthal watched from his command throne as ship after ship oriented toward the edge of the system, their hyperspace drives spooling up for the journey home. The Prometheus remained motionless in the center of what had been their formation, a silent reminder of everything that had gone wrong with this mission. Around him, his officers worked in stunned silence. The reality of what had happened was still sinking in. The greatest military force the Coalition had ever assembled, turned away by a single ship. A single ship that could have destroyed them all with the same casual effort a child might use to crush an insect. "Admiral." Sothis approached his throne, her wings folded tight against her back. The fleet is ready to translate. We await your order."
Crixthal didn't respond immediately. His mind was churning, processing the implications of everything Chen had revealed. 70 years! The humans had been preparing for 70 years, building weapons and ships in secret, watching the Coalition's every move. Everything his intelligence had told him about humanity, their primitive technology, their modest fleet, their vulnerability, had been a carefully constructed fiction.
"How?" he asked finally. "How did they deceive us so completely?" Sothis was silent for a long moment. "I've been reviewing the sensor data," she said finally. "The graviton cascade projector, the weapon they used against the asteroid, it manipulates space-time at a fundamental level. Such technology would require an understanding of physics that exceeds our own by a considerable margin."
They're more advanced than us.
In some areas, significantly so. In others, she hesitated. "Admiral, I don't believe they were lying about anything. The Dreadnought's power readings, its weapons, its capabilities, everything we observed matches their claims. They could have destroyed us. They chose not to."
"Why?"
"I think." Southis's compound eyes reflected the stars beyond the viewing port. "I think they meant what they said. They don't want war. They want to be left alone." She paused. "And they want to offer that same choice to others."
Crixthal considered this. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a species that sought power without the desire to dominate. The Coalition's history was built on the fundamental assumption that strength existed to be used, that the strong would always seek to control the weak. It was the natural order, the inevitable order. But what if it wasn't? Instead, they had issued a warning and requested withdrawal. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Crixthal looked at Sothis, at her compound eyes that held centuries of genetic memory, at her wings that could have carried her ancestors across the crystal forests of her homeworld. The Velthrani had joined the Coalition voluntarily, choosing alliance over subjugation. They had always been the Coalition's conscience, such as it was, the voice that sometimes counseled mercy when others demanded blood. "My orders," he said slowly, "are to report the truth." Sothis's wings twitched in surprise. "Admiral?" "The Coalition must know what it faces. Not a sanitized version, not a face-saving interpretation. The truth." He rose from his throne, feeling older than he had ever felt. Admiral Chen was right about one thing. What we do next will determine whether our civilization survives or falls. I will not doom the Dominari, or any other species, because I was too proud to admit that we were wrong. The Council will not react well to such a report. No, they won't. Crixthal allowed himself a grim smile. But they will react. And perhaps, when they understand the stakes, they will choose wisdom over pride. He looked back at the viewing port, at the distant shape of the Prometheus still hanging in space. Perhaps. And if they don't? Crixthal had no answer for that. Part 6. The Return. The journey back to Coalition space took 12 days. 12 days of silence and contemplation as the officers and crew of 473 ships processed what they had witnessed. There were no celebrations, no songs of victory, only the quiet hum of hyperspace drives and the weight of questions that no one wanted to ask. When they finally emerged at the Coalition's capital system, Crixthal found a delegation waiting. The Coalition Council had convened an emergency session. Representatives from all 12 member species gathered in the great amphitheater at the heart of Dominion Prime, their bodies arranged in the traditional hierarchy that placed the Dominari at the apex and the conquered species at the base. Crixthal took his place before them, and for the first time in his career he felt like a supplicant rather than a conqueror. Admiral Crixthal. The voice belonged to Overlord Thrain, supreme commander of all coalition forces and the oldest living Dominari. His scales had faded to a mottled gray with age, but his eyes still held the cold calculation that had maintained his position for 3 centuries. You were dispatched with the largest fleet in coalition history to resolve a simple matter of subjugation. You return with that fleet intact, but your mission unaccomplished. Explain. Crixthal activated the holographic display he had prepared, the images and sensor data from the confrontation at Sol. The Council watched in silence as the Prometheus emerged from its dimensional rift, as the asteroid vanished in an instant, as Admiral Chen delivered his ultimatum. When the recording ended, the council chamber was utterly silent. "You are telling us," Overlord Thrain said slowly, "that a single vessel turned away our entire fleet." "I am telling you what happened, Overlord. One vessel, one demonstration, and the absolute certainty that if we had engaged, we would have been annihilated." "Impossible!" The speaker was a Krogan delegate, his scarred face contorted with disbelief. "No species can develop such technology in isolation. No species can hide such capabilities from coalition intelligence for 7 decades. And yet they did. Crixthal met the Krogan's eyes without flinching. Our intelligence was wrong. Our assessments were wrong. Our understanding of human capabilities was not merely incomplete, it was almost entirely fictional. They showed us exactly what they wanted us to see, and we believed it because it matched our expectations. "Then what is the truth?" Overlord Thrain demanded. "The truth is that humanity is more advanced than we are. Not in all areas, perhaps, but in the areas that matter. Weapons, propulsion, energy generation. They have technologies we cannot even identify, much less replicate. And according to Admiral Chen, they're still building. In 10 years, they'll have a fleet of ships like the Prometheus. In 20, they'll be capable of challenging the coalition directly." "Then we must strike now!" The Krogan delegate slammed his fist against his console. "Before they complete their fleet, before they become too strong to defeat." "Strike with what?" Crixthal asked quietly. "I brought 473 ships to Sol. The Prometheus could have destroyed all of them with a fraction of its power. Even if we committed every vessel in the coalition, we would still face a weapon capable of erasing asteroids from existence. And that was at 1% power. 1%. The council chamber fell silent again. "There is another option," Crixthal continued. "Admiral Chen offered it himself. He does not seek war. He does not seek conquest. He wants humanity to be left alone, and he wants other species to have that same choice." "The choice to leave the coalition?" "The choice to resist conquest. The choice to maintain their independence. The choice that we have denied 64 civilizations over 8,000 years." Crixthal looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from species both willing and conquered. Admiral Chen called it an alternative. I believe he meant it as a warning. "A warning of what?" "Of what happens if we continue as we have. The coalition's power has always rested on fear, on the certainty that resistance is futile. But humanity has proven that resistance is possible. Word of what happened at Sol will spread. It's already spreading. The crews of 400 ships know what they saw.
Soon, every species in the coalition will know that a single human dreadnought faced down the largest armada in galactic history and won without firing a shot.
He paused, letting the implications sink in. When that happens, Overlord, how many of our subjugated species will begin to reconsider their circumstances? How many will reach out to humanity, seeking alliance? How many rebellions will we face, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy there exists a power willing and able to challenge us?
You speak of the end of the coalition, Overlord Thrain said.
I speak of what's coming, regardless of what we do. The only question is whether it comes through negotiation or through war. And if it comes through war. Crixthal shook his head. We will lose. That is not opinion, Overlord. That is mathematical certainty. We cannot match their technology. We cannot match their weapons. We cannot match the determination of a species that has spent 70 years preparing for exactly this conflict.
Then what would you have us do?
It was the question Crixthal had been waiting for. The question he had spent 12 days preparing to answer. Change, he said simply. Reform the coalition. End the practice of forced subjugation. Grant the conquered species a path to self-determination. Make the coalition something worth joining rather than something to be feared.
The chamber erupted in chaos.
Part 7. The Decision. The debate lasted for 17 days. Crixthal testified repeatedly, presenting the evidence from Sol, answering questions that ranged from technical to philosophical. He was joined by Sothis and other officers who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, Dominari, Velthrani, Krogan, and representatives of a dozen other species who had seen the Prometheus and understood what it meant. On the 18th day, the Coalition Council reached its decision. Overlord Thrain rose from his position at the apex of the chamber, his ancient body seeming to carry the weight of millennia. He looked out over the assembled delegates, the powerful and the conquered, the willing and the subjugated, and spoke the words that would change galactic history. The coalition has endured for 8,000 years through strength and unity. We have faced challenges before, and we have overcome them. We will face this challenge as well. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was heavy with something that might have been resignation. But we will not face it through war. A murmur ran through the chamber. The evidence presented by Fleet Admiral Crixthal is incontrovertible. Humanity possesses capabilities that exceed our own in critical areas. A direct military confrontation would result in catastrophic losses from which the coalition might never recover. This is unacceptable. He turned to address the conquered species section of the chamber. It has also become clear that the coalition's current structure is unsustainable. For 8,000 years, we have maintained order through dominance. We have incorporated species through force and maintained their compliance through fear. This methodology has served the Dominari well, but it has created vulnerabilities that humanity has exposed. Overlord Thrain's voice hardened. If we continue on our current path, those vulnerabilities will be exploited. Species that now serve the coalition will seek alliance with humanity. Rebellions will erupt across our territory. We will face not one enemy, but dozens, perhaps hundreds, all united against us, all armed with technology we cannot match. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembly. Therefore, the Council has decided to pursue a different course. Effective immediately, the practice of forced subjugation is suspended. Species currently classified as conquered will be offered a path to self-determination, with full membership in a reformed coalition available to those who choose to remain. Military operations against independent civilizations will cease, and diplomatic initiatives will be prioritized. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some delegates, primarily from the dominant species, rose in protest, shouting objections that echoed off the chamber's ancient walls. Others, representatives of conquered worlds, sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were hearing.
Overlord Thrain raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. "This is not weakness," he said. "This is adaptation. The coalition has survived for 8,000 years because we have recognized threats and responded appropriately. Humanity is such a threat. Our response must be proportional." He looked directly at Crixthal. The Admiral was correct. What happens next will determine whether our civilization survives or falls. I choose survival.
He lowered himself back into his seat, and for a moment no one spoke.
Then, slowly, one of the conquered species delegates rose. She was Threlkai, her body a living network of bioluminescent neural tissue, her consciousness distributed across a dozen linked organisms. She had been silent throughout the proceedings, observing with the patient wisdom that characterized her ancient species. "For 3,000 years, the Threlkai have served the coalition," she said, her voice a harmonic resonance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We were conquered in a war that killed half our population and destroyed our homeworld. Since then, we have provided the coalition with biological technology, our ships, our weapons, our very flesh, grown from the neural networks that define our existence." She paused, and the light patterns across her body shifted in complex patterns. "In all that time, we have never been offered a choice. We have served because resistance was futile, because submission was survival. Now you speak of reform, of self-determination, of change." Her light patterns intensified. "The Threlkai accept. We will remain with the coalition, not as conquered subjects, but as equal partners. And we will remember this day, Overlord Thrain. We will remember that when faced with extinction, you chose adaptation over destruction. Perhaps there is hope for the Dominari after all." One by one, other conquered species rose to speak. Some expressed skepticism, demanding guarantees and assurances. Others offered cautious support, acknowledging that the reforms, while unprecedented, represented a genuine shift in coalition policy. A few declined membership entirely, announcing their intention to seek independence and pursue their own paths. But the majority chose to stay, not out of fear, but out of something that resembled hope. As the session concluded, Crixthal found himself standing at the viewing port, looking out at the stars that surrounded Dominion Prime. Somewhere out there, 12 light-years away, a dreadnought named Prometheus floated in the void, a monument to human determination and a warning to anyone who might threaten humanity's home. He wondered what Admiral Chen would think of today's events. Would he be satisfied? Would he believe the coalition's reforms were genuine? Or would he dismiss them as a temporary measure, a ploy to buy time while the coalition rebuilt its strength? Perhaps it didn't matter. Perhaps the reforms, once begun, would take on a life of their own. Once species knew they had a choice, they would fight to keep it. Once power was shared, it could not easily be taken back. Perhaps humanity had changed the galaxy simply by proving that change was possible. Epilogue. 5 years later. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus, watching as the newest member of Earth's dreadnought fleet completed its final space trials.
The Athena was slightly larger than its predecessor, 14 kilometers rather than 12, and its graviton cascade projectors had been upgraded to third-generation models capable of even greater precision.
Behind him, the door slid open and a familiar figure entered.
Admiral Chen. Secretary General Lin Wei offered a respectful nod. She had replaced Chen's late wife in that role 3 years ago, after the heart attack that had claimed Maria's life. "You asked to see me?"
I did. Chen gestured toward the viewing port. The Athena passed all her trials with flying colors. She's ready for assignment.
Excellent news. The Coalition's Reformed Intelligence Service reports continued stability along our borders. No hostile activity, no aggressive posturing. Whatever you said to Admiral Krixthal seems to have worked. Chen smiled slightly. I told him the truth. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Lin Wei moved to stand beside him, her reflection ghosting across the transparent aluminum of the viewing port. Speaking of the truth, I've received a somewhat unusual request. The Coalition has asked if you would be willing to attend a diplomatic summit on neutral territory. They want to discuss cooperative ventures.
Cooperative ventures? Cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, mutual defense agreements. Lin Wei shrugged. I know, I was surprised too. But their new High Council seems genuinely interested in changing how they interact with the rest of the galaxy. They freed the last of the labor colonies, dissolved the forced breeding programs, and established autonomous governments for the former conquered species. And they want us to validate those changes. They want us to stop building dreadnoughts, or at least slow down. Lin Wei's expression was unreadable. Can't say I blame them. We've got 5 now, with 12 more in various stages of construction. At some point, that stops being defensive and starts being something else. Chen was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, he had stood on this same deck, facing down a fleet that could have been the end of human civilization. He had made threats and demonstrated power because those were the only tools the Coalition understood. But he had also meant what he said about not wanting war, about humanity's desire to be left alone. We'll attend the summit, he said finally. But we won't stop building. Not yet. Trust takes time, and the Coalition has 8,000 years of history to overcome. When they've proven, truly proven that they've changed, we can discuss arms limitations.